How does one become an artist? Careful what you wish for, cause you might just get it. I was very inspired by the old buildings, the architecture and the history that was there. I painted everything with great struggle. I was about to learn that what I was pursuing was not art. It was a craft maybe, but it was not art. It's a whole genre of filmmaking that most people aren't even familiar with. It is really the reason why I even have good memories of university. How does one become an artist? And is it even something we become? Or is this who we are and have always been? That is definitely debatable, and I will explore this topic in greater detail some other time. My journey as an artist started during the very first year of my life, at least according to my parents. And if you have been following my channel for the past few years, thank you for your support. And if you're new here, my name is Anelia and I'm an artist, and I work in various media, mostly painting and drawing as well as animation. I think fate had a very huge role to play in me taking on the journey that I have been on. As I said, my journey as an artist started during the first year of my life. It started when my parents were helping my aunt to prepare for her exams. And so to keep me occupied with something, they gave me a pen and some paper. And this is the drawing I produced. I think I have a vague memory drawing this drawing, but I don't really remember the day or what I was thinking at this time or what I was trying to portray. But this was definitely how my interest in drawing was discovered from a very early age. And from then onwards, drawing became my favorite activity, which I used to do for fun as a child. Besides the fact that I really liked drawing, I also had the support of my parents as well as relatives. My aunt was actually the one who preserved the drawing and gave it to me sometime, I think it was in 2010. Throughout my childhood, my parents were always very supportive. They were very encouraging and they always made sure that I had enough paper and supply of drawing equipment. My great-grandmother used to joke that this kid will definitely become an artist when she grows up. And she really wanted me to enter this competition which we had in Bulgaria, where children's drawings were shown on TV. This was after the news when they were showing the weather forecast. They had the weather forecast details, all the temperatures and everything displayed against the background of a selected drawing done by a child. I don't know what the rules were to enter, but I was definitely not interested. Definitely not interested to have my drawing shown to the whole country. The very first time that I was recognized for my art was at the end of grade 1. We had some events that were just for fun, and one of them which I entered was a drawing competition, and the topic was children in summer, and we had to draw on the school courtyard pavement. I got a prize for this drawing. It was a puzzle, and I was very proud of it because this was actually the very first thing that I earned with my own work. In Bulgarian schools we had, I actually don't know because I don't know how much has changed. We had these booklets which were basically like an ID book. The front page had our photo and our personal details, our ID number and our name and student details, and the other pages were columns for the teacher to insert all our marks, and the last few pages were just for any misdemeanors or to record how many days we were absent and stuff like that. In Bulgaria, the grading system is quite different from the grading system in the other countries I have lived in. In Bulgaria, we have a number system where 2 is weak and a failure, 3 is average and a pass, 4 is good or rather satisfactory, 5 is very good, and 6 is excellent. One day, the art teacher, who was very impressed with my work, for some reason, I don't know why, but she had decided that the highest mark, 6, for excellent, was not enough. And so she allowed herself the liberty to write a non-existent mark in my book. Yes. She wrote 7, and I don't have the book with me, but I remember this very well. She wrote 7, and she explained that the grading system simply did not suffice. And that came as a surprise to me because although I liked drawing and I thought my drawing was good, I was surprised. Why was she so impressed with my particular drawing? But as it turned out, this was actually consistent in all the other countries that I've lived in. And I will get to this in a moment. Fast forward a few years later, at the end of 1996 and the beginning of 1997, Bulgaria was hit by a major financial crisis. The hyperinflation was very serious. We had food shortages, the stores were empty, there was no bread. It was basically a complete disaster. And the saying that went around was that whoever survived the winter will regret it in spring. And this was actually when our journey in other countries began. During that time, my father had applied and got the position at the Himei University in Matsuyama, Japan. He is a mathematician, and his area of research is in the field of topology. He is not an artist, although this is debatable because he is very talented, he draws very well. I have seen some of his paintings which were displayed in my grandmother's apartment, and I was very impressed. And as he likes to say it, mathematics is also creative work. And so we went to live in Japan for the next 2 years. I was just 10 years old at the time, and my brother was about 11 months old. The university had paid for my father's business class ticket, but for the rest of us, my mother and my brother and myself, my parents had to sell all their belongings to be able to pay for our economy class tickets. I was actually very excited about the journey ahead. I mean, it was a new world, and I saw it as an adventure. I was only concerned that it would be very difficult to learn a new language, obviously. But other than that, I was actually very excited. I started school in April of 1997, and this was in grade 5. I obviously didn't speak any Japanese, and it was a Japanese school. I wasn't expected to learn all the subjects. In fact, I was only present for the subjects where Japanese wasn't necessary, things like music, art, mathematics, sports. But during the other lessons, the principal took it upon herself to give me private lessons in Japanese, free of charge, one-on-one lessons. And she was a very friendly woman, she was a very good teacher, and I made progress really fast. In about 2 weeks, I was comfortable to have a basic conversation, and in 2 years, I had become fluent in Japanese. Speaking Japanese, of course. Writing is a whole different story. And even in the Japanese school, I was recognized for my art. I remember we had this outing at the local Ishite temple, and it was the whole day that we were at the temple, and we had to paint any of the traditional architecture that was there, or the scenery, or the gardens, anything. And so I painted the temple, the tall building. And for some reason, the teachers were very impressed with my drawing in particular. Although I didn't think it was the best, they thought it was. And I don't have the drawing with me, but basically, because I was sitting on the ground, I had drawn the building from a low angle, and so there was a bit of perspective of the building being looked up from below. And that wasn't because I was intentionally trying to draw it this way, but simply because I was sitting on the ground and looking up, and this was my point of view. They were very impressed with the drawing, as I said, and they had framed it and put it outside of the school's principal's office, alongside 2 other drawings from the previous years. And I never got it back, but I got this instead. And thanks to Google Translate, I have been able to translate more or less what it says. During the 2 years when we were in Japan, my father had applied for another position. This time it was in Durban, South Africa. And he did his interview over the phone and he got the job. But before we moved to South Africa, we went back to Bulgaria to prepare for our visits. We arrived in South Africa in May in 1999. And once again, I had to attend school where I didn't understand the language. And this was almost after 1 year gap of not being in any school. I had tried to learn some English, and I remember introducing myself to the deputy principal, and she asked me, "What is your name?" And I replied, "My name is Anelia." And she told me, "No, that is not necessary to say my name is. You can just say Anelia." And I was a bit disappointed because I had made this effort to try to say a whole sentence in a foreign language, and I thought it wasn't appreciated. But I think they were left under the wrong impression that I actually spoke some English. And besides my name is, I didn't speak any English, and I couldn't understand anything. All the lessons were basically sounding like gibberish to me. And unlike in Japan, I didn't have the same support. I was basically left to figure it out on my own. Maybe make some friends and naturally learn how to speak English. The only English lessons that I got were at this language lab at the university, which is basically for foreign students, where they have textbooks with tapes and a tape recorder. So you basically listen to the tape and repeat the lesson and record yourself repeating the lesson, and you learn as much as you want in your own time. I attended this language lab after school or during the weekends or the holidays, but during the other lessons I was basically present, and it was super boring. If you think school is boring when you understand the language, trust me, it is super boring when you're sitting there and you can't understand anything. And on top of that, the teacher addressed her complaints, or should I say concerns, that I wasn't making progress as fast as she was hoping. Well, it was basically made clear that I was the problem they didn't want to deal with. Unlike in Japan, where the teachers understood that a child is obviously not going to be able to speak Japanese unless they are taught, this was a different story with English. The reason why I'm saying this is to show that I wasn't anyone's favorite student. They didn't really like me very much. Despite that, they too recognized me for my art. At the end of grade 7, I was awarded the art trophy. It was shared with a boy, but that was only because the art lessons were done during the PE lessons, meaning when the boys were doing PE, the girls were doing art and vice versa. I started high school in 2001 and my English had somewhat improved. I was able to read books, I was able to have a conversation, but school was still very difficult for me. I couldn't understand most of the subjects, and I was doing better in art than I was in any other subject. But it wasn't until grade 10 that my love for painting was really discovered, or should I say cultivated. The teachers were very good and they were really instrumental in nurturing what was up until this point mostly just potential. The very first painting project which we did was a copy painting where we had to paint a copy of an Impressionist artist's painting. Here I'm showing you the original. The goal of this project was to learn about color and color mixing and to experiment with different brush strokes. It was a very useful project and it was the warm-up to our future painting projects. Here I'm showing you my painting and the teachers were very impressed. This painting had made its way to the staff room where it was on display for some time, but eventually they gave it back to me just before I graduated high school. The other painting project which we did was a self-portrait which we had to paint, but in complementary colors. We could choose from either red and green, blue and orange, or yellow and purple. And I chose yellow and purple because it was the most aesthetically pleasing to me. We thought it was the easiest, but if you ask me now, I know that it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because to paint light and to paint the local color are two different things. Your light is the light and the color is the color. It doesn't matter which color you choose to have as your light, but that is a topic for a whole video. This is my portrait, and I remember the teachers used to tell us that you can guess the age of the artist by the way they portray the eyes. The age or the level of experience, I suppose, but there is definitely truth to that. And you will see what I mean when I show you my later works. At high school, I also became fascinated with surrealism, especially visual metaphors. I really wanted to create thought-provoking artworks, and I believed at the time the best way to encourage the viewer to analyze the image and to encourage them to think about what the artist was trying to convey was through the use of visual metaphors. A lot of my work which I'm about to show you has surrealist elements to it. This was because I believe this was the best way to express an idea through visual art. This is a painting, but the original drawing which I had done was on chalk. It was framed at some point, but because the frame was very heavy, unfortunately it fell from the wall. And the broken glass cut through the drawing. So I thought the best thing to do was to make another one. But I wanted to make the artwork from more durable materials, so I painted it in acrylics on canvas. And this is the painting, and I managed to find some random photo which I had of the original drawing, but unfortunately I don't have any other photos. Overall, I was doing very well in art, and that was a huge contrast compared to my success or the lack thereof in every other subject. I got 100% for my practical exam at the end of grade 12, and keep in mind that they rarely ever give 100% for anything, unless it's something like mathematics where you can prove that you got all the answers right. They don't like to give 100%. In fact, it is considered that as long as you get an A, you have done very well. Nobody is aiming for 100%. At the end of high school, I was once again awarded the art trophy. I had done very well in art, but not nearly as well in every other subject, which left me with very limited options as to what I was going to study after I graduated high school. And you may be wondering, is it necessary to study? Well, it all depends on what your options are. But for me, because I was in a foreign country and I was being educated in a system that was quite different from the education system back in my home country, it was better to have something which would be internationally recognized. The school systems vary from country to country, but university degrees are supposed to be internationally recognized. And for that reason, it was best to continue my studies, even if for no other reason but to just have a level of education which was internationally recognized. I was definitely going to go into a creative field. I had applied for various disciplines at the Durban University of Technology. I had applied for fine art, graphic design. I don't remember if I applied for fashion design. I think I tried everything. I did assignments, I submitted portfolios, and I remember, I think he was the head of the graphics design department or whoever was in charge, and he told me, your portfolio and your results will force me to accept you, but I can see that graphic design isn't really your passion, and there are people waiting in line whose portfolio is not as strong as yours, but they are really passionate about graphic design. Please register for fine art, because if you register for graphic design, I will have to accept you, and I will be denying the others the opportunity to pursue what they're really passionate about. It was something along those lines, and thank God, because I honestly probably never was passionate about graphic design. That was just seen as a viable career option for me, and that is why I even applied. I qualified to apply for university. They had a point system and I was within the range, but I could not be admitted without an exam. This was an English test which we had to write, which was very easy. It was a multiple choice test. The idea was to test whether the prospective student understands English enough so that they are able to cope with the lectures. Obvious reasons, sounds reasonable. In South Africa, they had this equity system, and the bar was set higher for people who were considered to come from a privileged background. There were various factors which played a role in this. And I don't remember exactly what the division was, but for a white female from a next Model C school like myself, the result which I had to get to pass was 80 or 85%. And I was a bit worried that maybe I wouldn't be able to pass this test, but I went to write this test anyway, and the test was super easy. It was very easy. I don't know what I got for it, but if I made any mistakes, it was probably because I was careless. And I can tell you that even if you get 100% for this test, it doesn't mean that you'll understand any of the lectures. The standard of the language during the lectures was actually very high. The test was really easy, but it was also very tricky. You had to be very careful and you had to pay attention to the questions. But if you knew the language quite well, there was really no way not to get those marks. So eventually what ended up happening is I registered for fine art at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And initially, this was where the script was flipped on me. Up until this point, I was used to the idea of being recognized for my art. I was used to the idea that it was highly commendable, that people liked it. And now I was about to learn that what I was pursuing was not art. It was a craft maybe, but it was not art. I enjoyed some of the courses very much, especially the expressive drawing course. We did figure drawing, we painted portraits. It was very useful, it was very interesting. Painting, on the other hand, not so much. It wasn't actually clear who was teaching the painting modules. There was one professor who was very good. I don't know if he was retired, but he wasn't teaching full time. Most of the painting courses were led by PhD students. I got into a bit of trouble, which was partially my own fault, with one of the PhD students who was lecturing the painting module. She gave us an assignment to paint a self-portrait with one of our favorite objects. It was meant to be a diptych in 2 pieces. On the one panel, we were meant to have a painting of ourselves, and on the other panel, an object which we really liked that meant something to us. And I chose not my art trophy because I don't get to keep that one. I chose the vase which came with the art trophy as a gift. I was very fascinated with the refractions, the reflections, and the distortions in the glass. And so I painted this painting. This is what got me in a bit of trouble, because I was very passionate about this project. I took it home over the Easter vacation. I hadn't specifically asked for permission. I just assumed that it was okay to take it home and work on it. And I had made quite a bit of progress. The lecturer didn't say anything about it, but she gave me a relatively low mark. She gave me 60% for it. I didn't really care, to be honest. I was doing it for the love of it, and I didn't really care about the mark. I mean, I was used to getting 90, 100% for my work, and now I was getting 60. And it wasn't like the standard was much higher. My mother, on the other hand, did not agree. She insisted that I request feedback from them as to why they had given me such a low mark. They could not produce it. They even sent the paintings to be evaluated externally. I think the external examiner raised it a little bit. It really doesn't matter. But this is the funny part. The lecturer's explanation as to why she had given me this mark was that because I had taken it home, she didn't believe that I had painted it by myself. She thought maybe I had paid someone to paint it for me. I mean, it was good, but I wouldn't say that it is something that a 20-year-old can't do. Looking back on it now, it looks to me that this was done by someone who is fairly new to painting, definitely not a highly experienced artist. It was actually quite experimental. I was experimenting with the hair, which they didn't really like. But it doesn't matter. She couldn't believe that I had done it myself, even though I had similar paintings from the same year to show that this is my style and this was done by me. But anyway, in year 3, I got into even more trouble with painting. Portraiture had become my favorite subject matter. I loved painting people in any color. I loved the way the light falls on the face. I was very much inspired by the eyes, the human expressions, and needless to say, this was my favorite subject matter. And during the previous year, actually, I had done a commission for one of my mother's colleagues. He wanted to give a very special gift for his wife for their first year wedding anniversary. The commission which I did for him was a portrait of the two of them from their wedding day. I actually painted the painting from a series of photos, and I combined the best shots into this composition. But an exact photo such as this painting actually doesn't exist. I chose to paint it this way, and the wife was actually very impressed. She really loved the painting because I had used a photo which was one of her favorite photos actually, and she was very grateful to have one beautiful painting of the two of them in her favorite dress. The husband who commissioned the painting also liked the painting very much, and he commissioned another one. This time it was of his late father. He wanted this exact photo, so it was an easier project. I was just required to paint it. You could say that it was less creative, but this was his request. This is how he wanted to immortalize his father, and this is what I created. He gave me the exact dimensions, and once again he was very pleased with the painting. Portraiture had become my favorite subject matter, and this was the problem. At the beginning of year 3, we were told that the lecturers will no longer give us projects, and that all projects are going to be self-motivated. They are simply there to mentor us and to help us find our own voice, not to tell us what to do, not to tell us how to paint, but to encourage us and to give us feedback. Well, we had those crit sessions. Crit stands for critique, where we had to attend and present our work and discuss it with the other students and lecturers even from the other disciplines. During that year, Professor Nugura from Ehime University was turning 60, and there was a conference in Sicily being held in honor of his anniversary. So my father had this idea, since I loved painting portraits, to paint a portrait of Professor Nugura and present it as a gift at the conference. I asked the lecturer if it was okay to include the commission as part of my end of semester exhibition, and they said, yes, of course. They didn't object, but besides the portrait, I had also become a finalist in this local art competition. As a finalist, I had to produce and exhibit a painting or an artwork at the group exhibition with the rest of the finalists. The topic was beauty, and we had the freedom to express the idea of what beauty means to us in any way we wanted. It was a free project. I did not want to do a portrait because I had noticed that a lot of people over the years had done portraits, and I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to be too predictable and do the same thing again and do another portrait, and so I painted this painting instead. The idea was something along the lines of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I had asked the lecturer if it was okay to include this painting as part of my end of semester exhibition, and once again they told me yes, of course you can use it. And I focused on those two paintings, but especially the portrait. I spent a lot of time perfecting it because I was very interested in it, and it was a great challenge, and that consumed a lot of my time. And I didn't have the volume which they were expecting of me. They were very unhappy. They called the portrait photorealism. They said that I wasn't getting out of my comfort zone, that all I was doing was I was trying to copy a photo. They were trying to get me to do something more loose or abstract instead of realism. And this was the problem. At the beginning of the semester, they had told us that they were there to mentor us and to help us grow in the direction which we had chosen. And I had felt that they were trying to get me to pursue a different kind of art. They wanted me to go in a different direction. And to be honest, I was also a bit stubborn. I wasn't taking their advice. I was inspired by different artists than the ones which they were recommending. And of course, they were not happy with my work. They were expecting to see a large volume of work and to see the progress, which was the result of their advice. Otherwise, what's the point of me being there? Anyway, I didn't quite do that, although I had tried to paint some small abstract works just to show that I'm not all about realism. I have to find where all of them are. Initially, the lecturer said that, okay, you will exhibit everything you have, even though your volume is rather small. She agreed, but when I went to the secretary, she told me, no, your name is not included in the list of people who will be exhibiting because you don't meet the criteria. It was clear that even they themselves didn't quite know what was happening, so I wasn't allowed to exhibit at the end of the semester, and as a result, I had to re-register for year 3 the following year. And that was the greatest blessing in disguise since I registered for university. I went to the conference in Sicily that summer, and I actually really enjoyed it. I was very inspired by the old buildings, the architecture, and the history that was there. It even inspired 2 of my night cityscape paintings. And I secretly wish that it would be so wonderful to live in a place like this, a place with such rich history. And now what I have to say about this is, Careful what you wish for, cause you might just get it. This was where my father had met the Maltese mathematician who later invited us to come to Malta. Well, not us, my father, but people take their families. Professor Nogura really liked the portrait, and to express his gratitude, he gave me this gift. Keep in mind, he had to buy 2 sets, one for me and one for his wife. This was to avoid any confusion, any misunderstanding. I re-registered for year 3 in 2009, and from the very beginning I was told not to register for painting. I was told, you know too much about painting. Register something you know less about. So I registered for ceramics and digital art. Digital art was what I really wanted to register for, but it didn't offer enough credits, so I had to pick another module as well. I wasn't aspiring to be a ceramist or a sculptor, but ceramics actually added to my knowledge of painting. I wasn't expected to make plates or sculptures. I was basically given the task to experiment with painting over glazed plates and cups, and I was experimenting with unusual painting tools such as feathers. Some of the pieces actually turned out quite well, others not so much, but it was overall experimental, and I was actually learning something new, something that I didn't know before, something that I hadn't learned in high school. There was also a ceramics conference, which was very interesting. We got to see works from other ceramists, and it was on an international level, and overall it was a great learning experience. Even though like I said, never aspired to be a ceramist. Me not graduating the previous year was actually a blessing in disguise. The lecturer who was leading the digital arts course had been on maternity leave the previous year, and so those courses were not available for the students in 2008. This was when we were introduced to fundamental 2D frame-by-frame animation. We did a number of exercises, and this was actually the beginning of my journey in animation. But in 2010 was really when the blessing came in. I had registered for my honors in fine arts. 2010 was the year when I was introduced to filmmaking. As part of our syllabus, we had the video production course in the first semester. We learned everything from script writing to post-production. At first, I was actually very stressed about it because I knew how difficult it is to take a good photo, let alone shoot a whole film with a small team of fellow students, or like in my case, mostly by myself. But to my own surprise, I actually did quite well, especially with regards to the cinematography. The filmmaking course was actually not for fine art students, it was only for media students, but this was an experimental year, and they had included this course in our syllabus because it provided the necessary background knowledge for those of us who wanted to continue our studies in animation. As a fine arts student, it was actually a privilege to attend this course, and it was really that experience which gave me the knowledge of video production which I have today, and I have applied this knowledge in all my short films as well as my channel so far. During the second semester, I focused on animation, and I produced this 5-minute animated film which was awarded Best Animation at the university's film festival. This year was really a turning point for me, and I'm very grateful for all the experience that it gave me. It is really the reason why I even have good memories of university. In 2011, I registered for my master's, and I was going to focus entirely on animation. We were given studio space. I was given the light box, which I was allowed to take home. And actually, for some reason, I had decided that it's a good idea to document my paint on glass stop motion animation process. I don't know why, but luckily I had decided to document at least a small section of it, at least a small part of the process, so I have a bit with me to show you. Like I said, I was allowed to take the light box home. Nobody was doubting that my work is my own, and it was a completely different experience from what I had experienced in my undergraduate years. Completely different experience. And if it wasn't for my master's research, I wouldn't have even known just how much animation actually offers. I wouldn't have known all the possibilities within the genre of animation. Most people are only familiar with children's cartoons, but this is all very limiting. Animation offers just so much more. It's a whole genre of filmmaking that most people aren't even familiar with. And I recently learned that when I entered my short animation at a local film competition in a festival. The feedback that I got from one of the jury members was that he was very impressed and he had no idea exactly what kind of animation to compare it to. And that is because animation as an art form is somewhat elite, although I don't think it should be, but it is. It is not something that you see on TV. So unless you have specifically studied animation or you are into filmmaking circles and attend specifically animation festivals, you probably don't know what animation can offer. I would go as far as to say that those were the best years of my life. Up until this point, obviously, but things changed once again. The Maltese mathematician had invited my father to apply for a position at the University of Malta. The position was for a full professor, which is what he was back in South Africa, and it offered progress even beyond retirement. It was very attractive at the time, and so basically the decision had been made. My brother and I were only told about it after the decision had been made. And this is why I say careful what you wish for, cause you might just get it. I didn't want to come to live here in Malta, at least not immediately before I finished my master's, but I knew that it was very unlikely that I would manage to complete my master's before my parents moved to Malta, and I actually wanted to remain in South Africa at least until I completed my master's. But I hadn't even submitted my proposal yet. My parents were busy selling the house, and we were still debating how we were going to organize this whole thing. And in the meantime, I was busy trying to defend my proposal. My supervisor was extremely helpful in speeding up the process and helping me defend my proposal on time, so that in the case that I had to leave the country, I could at least write my thesis remotely and submit it online, which is what ended up happening. Although this wasn't what I wanted, I would have much rather remained in South Africa, at least until I finished my master's. But this is what really changed my mind. And this was the house break-in. One evening, I thought I heard something. I'm pretty sure someone jumped over the post box and walked on the grass. I am perfectly sure that this was a human, so I looked outside and I didn't see anyone. And I didn't want to believe it. I thought, no, maybe it's a mistake. It can't be that. And it was about 2 a.m. and I was very tired, and so I fell asleep. And the next thing that I know is I woke up from the glass door shattering really loud. And there was a moment of silence and the alarm went off. I went out of my room where my father was in the corridor. He had gone out to formally check and let the security know that there is probably nothing. And I had tried to stop him. I didn't know that he hadn't heard the glass smashing. I thought he heard, and I was very surprised. Why is he going out to confront the people? So I tried to stop him, but I wasn't successful, and so I went after him. And luckily the people had left, and my father showed me this rock and said, "Look, someone was here." This was the moment when I realized that he actually hadn't heard the glass shattering. They had taken a camera, money, shoes, backup discs, stuff like that. And they ran away. It could have been worse, like it had happened to some people, but after that I didn't feel safe to stay in that house or any other house for that matter. And that wasn't the only house break-in which we had. The second time that the people came, I wasn't there, and my parents and my brother remember the incident very well, and they say the same thing, that they will never forget the sound of the glass smashing. When I went back to the residence where I was staying in Pietermaritzburg, because we lived in Durban and my campus was in Pietermaritzburg, my housemates were joking about it. They asked me, "Oh, you came here because you thought it was safe? Did you know that the Y was broken into last night?" "Yes, and they stole a toaster from the kitchen." Very funny, but that was the reality. For some reason, the crime had peaked during those months. I mean, there was always petty crime they call it, although this petty crime can be very serious, but for some reason it had peaked during those months, and I agreed that yes, the best thing to do was to come to Malta with everyone else. We came to Malta in December of 2012. Here in Malta, I participated in a number of exhibitions. The first one was an event, The Bubble, where I exhibited my paintings of Sicily. I don't remember if I had any paintings on display for the Slima Street Art Festival, but I also participated in 2 exhibitions with fellow Bulgarian artists in San Anton Palace. They were during an annual event celebrating Bulgarian culture. The theme of the exhibitions was Malta through the eyes of Bulgarians. I exhibited some seascapes as well as cityscapes depicting traditional Mediterranean or Maltese architecture. Those were basically my first impressions of Malta. And just like Sicily, I was also inspired by Malta's history and the Maltese traditional architecture as well. I didn't manage to find work within my field here in Malta. In fact, most of the works which I'm qualified to do, things like teaching, anything related to video editing or video production, require fluency in Maltese. But shortly after I submitted my master's dissertation, actually it was the very next day, for some reason, I believe it was just a coincidence, I received an email from film director Christopher Morrison. He was looking for an animator to animate a few segments for his live action feature film. And of course, I accepted the opportunity. It was a great experience. It was very challenging. It proved to be a lot more time consuming and demanding that we both thought it would be, but I'm very grateful for the experience. After that, I applied for another animation job. This was a Dutch production and they needed artists to paint all the backgrounds for all the scenes in oil paint. But what they were looking for were people who could match the main producer and animator style. In order to test our abilities, they gave us assignments. We were given an outline of an interior or an exterior or both, and an example painting. The goal was to create a painting with the outline and to match the style of the example painting. And although my paintings were quite decent, they looked nothing like what they were supposed to. It was almost impossible to match someone else's style. It was like trying to copy someone else's handwriting. And in retrospect, I probably would have been able to do that, but since I had spent the last few years writing essays, I hadn't dedicated a lot of time into painting. And although I was quite good at painting, I was actually not very experienced. I painted everything with great struggle. Contrary to popular belief, I wasn't painting those portraits because I didn't want to come out of my comfort zone. I was actually painting them because they were a great challenge for me. But like I said, I did paint everything with great struggle. And I didn't get the job. And then I realized it's about time I start working for myself. I had met a lifelong friend of mine back in 2015, and she gave me some tips and advice on selling my work online. At first, I couldn't take it seriously, but eventually I gave it a try and I sold my first miniature in 2019. It was really only a few days after I listed it online. Before I attempted selling my art, I had tried to create a short animation series and I had started another channel, but unfortunately it proved not to be feasible. There is just so much work that goes into one short animation and there really isn't enough time and there really isn't enough support. So I had decided to put this project on hold and maybe I will work on it from time to time. And then I had this random idea to start filming my painting process because why not? This is when I started uploading to this channel on a regular basis. At first, I didn't take it seriously. I was just experimenting, but eventually I got used to a certain setup. I got comfortable painting under the camera with the tripod obstructing my view. The quality of my videos improved, and as it turned out, a lot of people liked them. They have been asking me if I could make tutorials, and I will definitely be working on that. Having a channel actually proved to be quite useful because one time when I sold a miniature, I got a surprisingly not negative, it was technically neutral feedback, but the buyer wrote that she was very disappointed because she had thought that this was an original like many of the others she had bought, and I was surprised. I let the buyer know that if she didn't like it, of course she could return it and get a full refund. But if she liked it and she had any doubts, she could watch the painting process video. And after she saw the video, she apologized. It seems the lecturer back in the day wasn't the only one who was having doubts that my work is my own. And in this case, the buyer was having doubts that the human painted it. Because obviously she hadn't seen me, she doesn't know whose hands they are, but she got to see that it was an original done by a human and not a print. Because if it is on video, it must be true, right? Well, maybe not for much longer, but we will see how it goes. I will still be filming my painting process videos, regardless of whether there are any proof for anything or not. I very much love recording my process, and I really want to teach painting, so I have set myself the goal to create more in-depth tutorials. This is where I am at. If you have made it this far in the video, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.